Welcome to the Communicating Earth podcast by Climate Acceptance Studios, the podcast for and by climate and nature communicators. If you work in communications at a company or an organization dedicated to addressing the climate and nature crisis, or if you just want to understand the latest in research and examples of how best to communicate these complex problems, this podcast is for you. Today, for our first proper debut podcast, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Steph Speck, who is currently Global Director, Strategic Partnerships, Engagement and Communication at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. Steph, welcome.
Tom, thank you very much. And it's rather a mouthful, both my title and did you notice that the acronym for my title is actually SPEC? So I'm a SPEC or SPEC in my organization, which is serendipitous.
Do you think that's the reason they hired you?
I like to think so. Yeah, I just fit right in.
I'm a big believer in nominative determinism, bakers become bakers and so on.
Exactly. Yeah, don't ask what my surname means in German.
Okay, so we have an overriding, principle that's based on an amazing piece of research that's done by Krista Mayer, who works at University College London, and it's all about how to inspire action, and how you inspire action is through tales of action, even of themselves. So we always like to start the podcast by asking, what is the most inspiring tale of action that you have directly worked on in your career?
Well, look, I get bored very easily. So I'm always looking for what's active, what hasn't been done, what other people say that's impossible, or that's too risky, or you can't do that. So those kind of sentences or those kind of hesitations make my ears perk up. And I immediately think, I don't think it's so difficult. I think it just involves, a bit of this and a bit of that. So my background is working in tricky places around the world, places that I've come to know a little bit and fallen in love with often. Like places like Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine. And so I think the greatest challenge I've had is working in those places and sitting at the heart of governments often and seeing a completely different country than the country you hear about in the myths. And therefore, not being overwhelmed by this fake perception, but being completely embedded with what is possible, because you've had the chance to see people and intent and ambition and capacity and capability on the ground. So I guess I've spent the last 20 years working in places that people said you can't change things and you certainly can't bring investment in. And I've proven the opposite. So in Afghanistan, back in the early 2000s, we raised $1 billion for governance in Afghanistan. I ran the first Palestine investment conference. We raised $1.3 billion back in 2008 for that. And at the Green Climate Fund, where I was most recently, my portfolio involved leading our investment in fragile and conflict-affected settings. And we were able to grow the portfolio by almost $900 million in 15 months worth of investment. So that's where my heart beats fastest. When someone says it's impossible, I can see the need because I've heard the real stories and I figure I'm in the right time, right place, right time, and right job to do something about it.
And you've been there to see how the money that you've raised has been spent, right? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
So is there any particular project or project lead? Can you sort of name check a person, or is there a particular favorite, something that might be particularly inspiring to our listeners?
Yeah, look, I think for me, what was very special after I spent almost 3 years living and working in Somalia, in Mogadishu, when the first government was appointed. So being able to take $90 million worth of investment there with our partners, FAO and others, into Somalia was a really magical moment for me. And particularly because the form of investment is not just sitting at the center of the federal government, but it's really working in local communities, which is part of the reach that FAO gives the Green Climate Fund. It's embedded locally. And so you can be confident that when you're giving money through those structures, you're not just putting something in a central bank or a treasury or a department or a ministry, you're affecting real change on the ground. It's early days in that investment, so we've yet to see how that actually works out. But I think for me, the structure itself is rewarding because you're proving you can do something on the ground in places where people have all kinds of fears about being on the ground. So I think that's really the special one for me.
Very good, very good. How would you, because we're now going into more sort of general questions about climate communications, for the benefit of everybody cross-sector that we hope are listening. So firstly, like, how would you define climate communications?
For me, communication is always about bringing change. And it's that is the guts of good communication. Something should be different after you have done your bit or your piece or launched your campaign or talked to people or done something. So climate communication is about bringing change at a number of different levels. It's about bringing change in individuals' lives. What do I do in this world? What can I affect? And not just the simple things I can do in my day-to-day life, but the change I can affect when I come together with peers and colleagues and affect change at a national level. So it's about national scale, personally. It's about the communities that are really on the front lines, the world's most vulnerable places. It's about seeing something change there, because what good communications does is it doesn't just make things more palatable or easy to sell. It allows you to say, where do we affect change? I say it often when I teach communications, when I go in to see clients for the first time. Many people think that comms is that bit at the end. It's the icing on the cake. It makes things look pretty. You sell it for more. But actually, comms that brings change is making the cake itself. Do people want cake? Do they want pizza? How much will they pay for it? Where will they go to pay for it? So for me, if nothing is changing, or if I'm not communicating with the intent to change, it's not great comms. And in the climate space, nothing is more critical than change.
So with that driving force behind it, to what extent do you follow the climate communications science itself, those amazing social scientists out there who all the time are studying choice of language, choice of imagery, etc.?
Yeah, I'm a big devotee of expertise and experience and learning. So I am always trying to think, who do I trust? And it's still at a very individual level. Who do I trust to give me the information? Where do I find it? And what can I rely on? Because it's really critical. Climate change is based on science. It's not just based on lived experience. It's lived experience that allows us to tell the truth, but it's based on science. So therefore you can measure it, and you can measure what's happening and the impact of that. And the people who don't want us to think that climate change is real attack the very foundations of why we know it's happening. So for me, the science part of climate is really, really critical. But looking at communicators who can take the science and distill it for people like me who've never been in a lab in my life, but I know how to stand up and pitch, what has to happen because of what I know. So, and I think too, in a world that's dominated by our phones and social media, we've swapped opinion for expertise. So in a field like this, it's critical that we're informed by facts, data, and that comes from a credible source, but that we're skilled translators of that into making it make sense in people's lives.
And beyond the science itself, the specific niche of climate communication science, do you follow that as well? What are your opinions around that?
Yes, I do. And I think that's absolutely critical. And probably from my own side of things, when I was working at the GCF side, I was more interested in the perception end of climate change science. So what convinces people to change their mind? How do we get people involved in understanding what needs to change? So the perception end. And so things like the Yale climate study, for me, was a big piece of evidence-based research that looked at how we interact with climate. Do we believe it's real? And therefore, if we do, what actions do we have to take? Now that I'm at the Alliance, which is a science-based research organization, the kind of information that I am able to access on a day-to-day, which blows my mind from the 2,000 plus researchers we have, is it's real. And it's research in the interest of public good. So I literally have the luxury now of talking day to day with scientists who are demonstrating that it may, in fact, be possible to have a sustainable beef industry because we can reliably reduce methane, because we can grow the right types of grasses, all of those kind of things. For a knowledge nerd like I am, that really evidence-based, practical science that I can see, taste, touch in the field is what I get to interact with now on a daily basis. It's an enormous privilege. It blows my mind.
Let's go back to those meetings that you go and pitch in. So, like, who are you pitching to? Like, who are those people that you're convincing? And ultimately, like, who are the audiences for your various sort of communications work?
Look, when I'm thinking about communications work, I'm always thinking of reputation, return on investment, and relationship. And so it depends which of those three things I want to do in any setting. Is this a setting where I need to build a relationship with someone because both going to be useful to each other in the future? Is this a setting where I really need to make a case for why investment is needed, and how you would measure impact and how you could confidently make an investment because we can chart a pathway to impact? And then in others, which is around reputation, I'm thinking, what does that partnership model look like that allows both parties or several parties to shift the dial in something important? So whenever meeting I'm going into, I'm thinking, what is that outcome, relationship, reputation, or return on investment?
Talk to me a bit more about, especially reputation. Um, I mean, how do you define it? Like, what are the parameters?
Yeah.
Why is it so important? Do you think maybe sometimes sort of fear of reputational risk, holds you back or holds the organizations that you're working for back, or am I being unduly negative there?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Firstly, I think that reputation is basically about, can you be trusted to do what you said you're going to do? And that could be around knowledge, that could be around assets, that could be around, various ways that change is realized. And yes, I think that reputation is something um, that is easy to destroy for a number of reasons, both through activity and lack of activity. And I often think that organizations focus on activity as the main risk point, and I think it's actually lack of activity that really undermines reputation. So it's been very interesting, and I want to be very clear that I'm not commenting on part of the Green Climate Fund or my current organization here. I'm sharing really a personal take. But it's my job always in organizations to give advice, and then the people who run these things can make decisions with the advice I give. When Trump became president for the second time, we all saw the immediate, well, one of the first statements he made was around withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. And of course, he's taking that one step further now. He's not only withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, he's withdrawn from the UNFCCC convention. He's also stopped funding and pulled the board member from the Green Climate Fund. And there are many, many other climate impacts and things that he's taken and acts to. I think many organizations around the world went quiet, went under a rock. We saw the World Bank take climate out of every statement it made, out of every publication it was going to publish. We saw people start to talk about environment and nature and biodiversity rather than climate. We ran scared. But this is a fight where you never, ever win a fight by running away. It's like, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and we're really at peak drama stage in our relationship. And she's, she's very into storming out of the room. And the one thing I say to her, is the only thing I can think of often in those moments, is, I know I can't use her real name, but it rolls off the tongue. You can tell how often I've said this. XYZ, if you leave the room, you cannot change my mind because you're not interacting with me. So when you storm out, it doesn't get you any closer to what you want. If you want me to change my decision, how much pocket money I'm going to give, you need to be back in the room. And I think that's a very personal example of something I've observed happening over the year at a macro level. We have run scared. We know that nothing is going to change in the climate agenda of the states while President Trump is still president. So why are we running? Why are we running away? This is the time to double down on what we believe and prove, so that when, and inshallah, when the next election happens and we get a change, we're ready and raring to go with those pieces of work that we can double down on the impact side of things.
So how do you fight then from a communications perspective? How do you define fighting within your role and within your peers' roles around the world?
And it's an interesting term. I'm always a bit unsure whether I want to use the word war or fight, although it rolls naturally off my tongue, as you can see, in relation to climate, because I've read a lot of literature around behavior change. And we know that those extremes make it often harder to chart a middle path. It's much harder for people to come in from far, far away than it is if we're more, gathered towards the center. So when we use words like fight or war or battle, we're naturally polarizing the argument into enemies, non-enemies.
Mm.
So I struggle to understand. I think it is very much a war and a fight and a battle. And we see that because there are billions of dollars, trillions of dollars being spent on the other side of the climate denial and the fossil fuel industry. So on one hand, it is a fight, but I am very cognizant that using those words reduces it to us and them. And I think we need to see a lot more of us in the middle. What do we do together? What do we prove is working? Because that transition is already working. We're talking about a done deal. Investment in renewable energy and grids is now above $2.2 trillion a year. The fossil fuel capex stopped its growth at around, well, it's 40% actually below its peak in 2014 to 2015. So we're already winning. And maybe that's the kind of headset we need to take into these discussions more so than the us and them, either or. Are you my friend or my foe?
And I think we're winning as climate communicators as well, and we don't give ourselves enough credit. I mean, you were involved in the 89% project, is that right? In some sort of way?
I was involved in that. I follow it, and I think it's a genius idea because it takes away that idea that I am on my own, which is, of course, what the PR agencies that are on the side of fossil fuel extraction companies want us to believe, that you're on your own. They want us to believe a number of things, that's a big one. You're on your own, therefore you are. There's no solidarity. How do you fight if you're on your own? So that isolationist perspective that we have, that we all think is important, but we think we're alone in that central tenet at the heart of the 89% project, I thought was genius. To be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed I haven't seen more of it. Maybe I've dropped out of the circles where that discussion is quite so current, but I thought it started with such a big bang, and I would have loved to have seen more leaders on the global stage at COP and other international events really take courage from that and start to use that information and the language that was provided through that project just to frame their own remarks.
I think it's so significant if we can sort of wake up from the current sort of sleeping beauty slumber of pluralistic ignorance and realize that we are in the majority.
Yes,
As has been proven in
absolutely.
that other study by those amazing German academics a couple of years ago.
Yes,
I think
and
that's
Tom,
really important.
can I say something there too? It's like, okay, I'm 52, so I'm in that bandwidth where maybe there are people around my age who can still luxuriate in denying it. But my 13-year-old daughter, there's no question.
Mm.
She sees it, she's living with it. And when you go to a country like Iraq or Somalia or South Sudan, there is no question. Now, people might not call it, might not articulate climate change as in the words that we would use, but they all know something's up, and it's taking a toll on people, on domestic incomes, on the future of countries. It's a luxury to be able to say that it's not true, or it's not as extensive, or it isn't the threat that we think it is. That is a luxury position held by very few ignoramuses in the largely the Western world.
So how do we do it then? How do we get us to convince ourselves that this is a majority opinion, it's a done deal? And I think if we did do that, the climate communicators themselves, I think, would feel a great sense of encouragement because actually our work is cutting through. We are being successful.
I think there's two things that plague this space, particularly the climate change comms space. And one is that we need to always do something new or think of something new. So or innovative. I'm not sure where innovative, became a substitute or always meant something new. Innovative can just mean keep doing things that are working. I think often we drop things too early. So
Interesting.
we have that success is short term. It's not short term in this game. Sadly, I wish it could be, and would be more urgently driven success. So there's this, that we have to do something new rather than sticking with something that we've tried and that we've invested in to see whether we can make it better, and giving it the lifespan it needs to change. And the second thing is competitiveness. There's we that is the great thing about the fossil fuel industry. They have one message, that oil, the gas, the coal makes you prosperous. It's what the success of countries is built on. There's no discussion. That's how they've sold the extractive industries portfolio into countries. That's what they're still selling countries like Somalia and Nigeria and other countries. This is your only route to prosperity. Dig up what's in the ground. And we, on the other side, have a million different diverse ways of saying similar things. Now, that's appropriate in many cases because good comms theory is audience, and audiences think differently. So you need to know what they think, what they believe, and therefore what you need to tell them to shift that belief. I get that. But I think we give so many messages, and I wonder if that central message isn't more important. And we're competitive because that's that's the incentive, right? you go to donors and you go to funders with something new. That's the pitch. This is going to have the breakthrough that we've been looking through. So the incentive end of this business is also not okay. I wish there were, and these people and these organizations, institutes exist that give a lot of money on one-off projects around comms. And I wish someone would have an endowment fund approach for the next 10 to 15 years and say, here's your endowment fund. You come and fund whatever you like. Keep doing what you're doing. But let's have a central tenet that brings us all together so that we say the same thing, because there's incredible power. And any movement that started in history has had a central tenet rather than a diversified message.
I've got a thing about where we need to invent a word that covers everything, because it's like climate and nature and biodiversity loss and sustainability and earth. Is there some sort of one-off word that becomes universally adopted that covers it all, so that often the biodiversity nature people feel left behind because it's climate the whole time, despite the fact that actually when we look at the science, it's probably biodiversity loss that's going to get us before global warming, right? So that
yeah, and that's a bit of a time and scale thing. So when people started really to first start thinking about climate, and of course the climate people themselves were the slowest, BP and others were already thinking about this way back in the 1940s, 1950s. Amy Westerwald's podcast Drilled is just, it's compulsory listening for the history of how we got to where we are in this ownership of the climate change space being drilled down to, it's my problem as a person, as an individual. So, the PR firms working for BP from the 1940s, 1980s, and then particularly in 2004, 2006, they knew the power of getting it right and a message that mobilized masses. That's why we have the carbon footprint term, right? Genius. And we haven't been able to offer that same genius back. And I think that's because we're competitive. We have small budgets rather than ambitious budgets, and even with small budgets, when it's possible to make change, we're often not quite as bold as we should be, because we're governed by organizational politics and what's the art of the possible.
I mean, you're going down a conversational tributary now that could lead to an hour's conversation. However, we must remain disciplined for the overall structure of the podcast. And so therefore, I want to go on to our quickfire round now. So shoulders back, Steph, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, let's see whether this is going to work or not. Let's see whether you can keep our answers nice and brief. Okay, so what's the first word that comes to mind when I say climate?
Respect. A bit of a weird one. Respect, because we respect, we look after.
Very good, very good. So are you an activist, a campaigner, an advocate, an environmentalist, or something else? How do you define yourself?
I call myself an investment wrangler, a climate change investment wrangler, which involves, it's a bit like a rodeo. You never know what bull you're getting on. You've got to bring a lot of people together to get the right outcome. So I'm definitely a wrangler.
Who's your inspiration? Who's that one person, that one figurehead that inspires you the most, either now or in the past?
Jacqueline Novogratz. She's the founder and the CEO of Acumen Impact Investing, because she brings a morality and a never say die attitude, and she's making investments in the world's trickiest places.
If there's one book, TV show, movie, piece of culture within this space that you recommend our listeners absorb culturally, what would it be?
Books. I read 2 books over the Christmas holidays, Ministry for the Future. I was a bit slow to get onto that one. And then Ian McEwan's recent What Can We Know? I found both of them devastating. It took me days to recover and lots of red wine, but they really provided a compelling, horrific view of what the world will be like if we don't get on top of this.
What's your favourite communications channel?
Face-to-face. Face-to-face wins hands down. Face-to-face and taking people to where they see what's happening on the ground. You cannot escape the reality of things when you're looking in it. And I think that is what changes things. So my challenge then as a comms person is, how do you bring the face-to-face visit, which you can't take, 1 million people on, but you may be able to take 1 or 2 and extrapolating that so that it has broader cut through, but face-to-face every time.
If there's one stat or fact that you think is like the most effective in your climate comms, what would it be?
Oh, I might flip this a bit. And I want to go back to the BP carbon footprint, the 2004 genius move, which, not only just messages and campaigns, but one of the first online calculators where you could feel involved in making your own personal decisions about your online calculator to promote. I think the very first example was a low carbon diet. Genius move. We need to do more of that the other way around in the comms space.
What is that one piece of mis or disinformation that you would like to permanently, immediately eradicate and retire? Just one.
That we don't have enough funding to do something about it. The money, there's more than enough money to bring change to any big problem the world faces. It's just in different pockets, or may take different channels, or we have to be fearless in going after it. But there's more than enough money to fix everything that we need to fix.
Taking the international climate communications sector as a whole, if you could change just one thing about it, what would it be? Aside from funding.
I would be less worried about attribution, and I would start investing in quantity bots work. I would be looking at, can we do something clever with bots and tackling the misinformation debate at scale?
And finally, what's your number one source of climate information?
LinkedIn and my daughter. LinkedIn, because I think it's the place where you can have a casual, it's a bit like going to the pub for me on a Friday night, where people inject little bits of interesting tidbits. And there are people I follow on there. So Cristiano Figueres, Lawrence Tobiana, who are really up to date and give you those little capsules and nuggets of information. And my daughter, because my daughter cares and wants a better future. So she's often on top of what's going on, or the legal cases that governments are fighting, and has a strong opinion about it.
And she must be proud of her mum and everything that she does, right?
I like to think so. I remind her of that.
Very good. So that was the quick fire round. Is there one question within there that you'd like to talk about more within those previous questions?
That capital question, like, where is the money? Is there not enough? There is.
Yeah. So what's the one climate myth or misconception you want to retire?
Yeah,
There's not enough
well,
money.
it's
I
just,
totally
yeah,
agree.
it's
You just
how
look
do
at
we
fossil fuel subsidies as a starting point.
Yes.
7
Yes,
trillion last
exactly.
year.
Exactly. And also for comms budget, I don't know why this, I will get the story details a little bit wrong, but a few years ago when UK was looking at, is it the North Sea offshore drilling, something or other, there was something going on there, and it was going to be up for debates in the UK Parliament. I can't remember who the extraction company was there. So, but whoever it was, immediately in 2 weeks went and spent something like 700, 800,000 pounds on Facebook. Immediately. There was no hesitation. Big spend. Well, let's get to people where we need to get to them. What did we do? Maybe we need to form a coalition or a forum, so there's something for me, there's something there that we haven't got right in terms of scale, in terms of pace, and then in terms of demand for the right budgets we need from the right people to do something at scale. I know that people think you can be innovative with no money, and you can. You can also be incredibly innovative with a lot of money, and I'm always looking for the lot of money end of things.
Yeah, I mean, the bots especially, right? So,
Yes.
so tell me about what are your opinions around bots, AI, all that sort of stuff as a tool?
Oh, I'm so pleased we're living in this world. I was a bit terrified at the start of it, but I think that AI gives us incredible opportunity to change the course of how we do things as people and where we spend our time, particularly. as long as it's properly governed and regulated. It can't exist as it is now, like a Wild West currently. So I'm deeply embracive of using technologies to do things differently, faster, smarter, and at scale. And I think AI gives us that. I think too, because we're on the good side, and this is a right thing that we are governed by ethics and morality. I'm not saying that's a right thing, but it means we are really always a bit hampered by doing it that way. And I'm wondering if there's a right way or a good way that we could do the bots thing at scale and effectively without having to worry so much about attribution, or maybe there's this attribution at scale methodology we could use there. Because for me, it's quantity, 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 quantity. You've got to keep that message going.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. However, there are some that would say, but what about like the energy consumption that sits behind these technologies?
Oh yeah, I don't have a pat answer or a spin answer for that. That worries me terribly, and it worries me terribly that some countries that are looking for for paths to prosperity, urgent paths to prosperity, because we've held them back from that for so long, that this is an easy way, to set up big data farms in, spare land and in those kind of things. So that worries me greatly, and I don't know what to do about that.
There's this fantastic app we've discovered recently, which is a French alternative to ChatGPT called Mistral. That is
As in
because
the mists, as in fog and all of beautiful things. Okay.
Mistral.ai,
Ah,
and because French is essentially nuclear, it uses I think an eighth of the energy of ChatGPT. So
I will take a look at that. Yeah, I feel deeply uncomfortable about this.
especially if you just moved to Italy, right? So this is very much a European product. So we'll put the link in the show notes, but also I'll share it with you as well.
Excellent.
Why do you think more action has not been taken?
Because I think many organizations, particularly in the multilateral world, are run by older men who have lost the ability to think differently and courageously. And we need more younger women in that space, people who are willing to take risks because they understand what's on the other side of not taking risk.
Can you define courage a bit more? What does courage mean?
It means sometimes doing things even though you don't know what the outcome will be, and um, it means having the courage, a bit like Mark Carney did at Davos a couple of weeks, to speak truth to power and say there is another way forward, and it doesn't look like this lie that we've been sold over the last 40 years of this experiment.
So you've talked about, volume, which I agree
Uh,
with. And I suppose you could term that a strategy, or is that more, just an overall attitude? But within that overall sort of volume idea, is there one specific strategy that if you had a magic wand and you said you had the ear and indeed the budget choices of every single climate communicator in the world, and everyone was unified around one strategy, could you define what that strategy is?
right. But I reckon I could. If if I put my mind to it, maybe that's saying something. Maybe that's I'm undermining myself there in that statement. I think it's something that's been tickling the edges of my mind as I've worked closer and closer to the climate center, or the center of climate investment. That what would it look like if we all did the same thing at the same time at scale and had enough money to do it? And I think the strategy for me there is maybe it's a step on from, there not being enough finance. It's a step on to say we're already 3/4 of the way there. It's tipped. I mean, sadly, also the planet has tipped in terms
Yeah.
of tipping points and planetary boundaries, but so too has the good side of things. That has always also tipped. And therefore, all the evidence that we need and all the structures and processes and laws and regulations and investment vehicles are there. They've already proven that it's working. There's a silence that has descended on that. Maybe it's nefarious, probably is, and that's why I think the quantity and the bots idea is so relevant here to break it out. When I talk to my dad, who's late 70s, about, and is a bit of a wanderer about climate change, about the reality of it. When I talk to him about the investments that are already being made and the fact that this is proven, he doesn't know that. He's never heard it. It's a surprise to him, and he's educated. So I think there's something in that sweet spot.
I think it's just,
there.
it's very simple. It's just making sure that everybody, as much as possible, finds out about all the amazing action that's already taken, because that will in turn inspire more action. People just don't
Yes.
know how many people in the world are working so hard to do it.
Yes.
And that's what really frustrates me. And I know you share this opinion because I've listened to other podcasts that you've done, that, when people poo-poo and shout down the COP process, because of course it's corrupt, because of course it's like ridden with lobbyists, but there are also like tens of thousands of people who gather together in the same place at the same time.
They want the same thing.
One for you're in a radically different, exactly, that are all unified together and all
Yes.
working towards the same common goal, and so, and indeed for those marginalized voices like Pacific Islands and stuff, it's their only opportunity to stand up in the international stage and very briefly be heard. So to
Yes.
to negate the process as just blanket corrupt, I think is in and of itself probably falling for an underlying PR tactic of the fossil fuel industry that's been seeded, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what do you think is the most important environmental message that the public needs to hear?
Oh, I it's not an environment message. It's a behavioral message. And I think it just links back to what we were discussing immediately before this question. The will exists. There's more will to do something about this, more belief in the fact that climate is real and we need to do something than on the other side. So I think it's a behavioral message rather than an environmental message. Enough people believe, we all believe the same thing. It's all working. Let's go for it. Maybe it's just let's go for it is the critical thing. I want to. I can't do it now, and I should have done it in the prep for this, but there was a fantastic event I went to at the New York Climate Week last year, and it was run by Catherine McKenna, who was the Canadian Minister of Environment.
I know her well.
She was reported, again, she was taken down. She, disparaging terms and things used about her, which I won't repeat. But she had a very quick, 5-step way of summing it up. Like, we believe it. It's true. It works. We can all do something about it. And I thought that mantra, if it becomes something like a mantra, is critical. Look how successfully it worked on the opposite side with the carbon footprint. We all jumped on board with that. We're still jumping on board with that in terms of Earth Day and lights and straws and buses and public transport rather than cars. But so actually, maybe that's it. Maybe it's thinking, how do we spin that? That's still what's that individual concern because I can control it and feel like I've done something good at scale. Maybe we need to flip that.
So
at scale and link it to legislation.
Which I too have heard. I've interviewed Catherine McKenna a bunch of times. She's super inspirational.
Excellent.
Like so charismatic, so amazing. So we'll dig those out and we'll put those in the show notes underneath the link to this podcast as well. Yeah, definitely. So right, here we go. Here's another one. I believe in the power of like metaphor. So is there a metaphor out there that you like or that you use when you're trying to win hearts and minds, and at the core of that behavioral change that you've talked quite eloquently about already?
I like the use of the word "quite" in there. That's so.
I'm British.
That's so UK.
It's inculcated into me through my education.
It's quite nice. It's quite nice, the discussion we've had today. Look, I think
when British people say "quite," they mean very. But they're they're too timid to say very.
I think the one that really that has forms a vivid picture in my mind is sleepwalking towards the cliff edge.
Okay.
That for me, because for me there's two courses of action, or that you can take there. There's the pull people away from the edge or shake them very hard to wake them up. There's a couple of things you can do there. And for me, that is exactly where I think we are. There's the edge. We all know it. Scientists have been raving about it and proving it for years. And yet there's this somnambulant way that we have of walking together, again, because the incentive structures can't quite right on the other side. So that for me is the terrible side of things. The other thing too is there's a beautiful poem, and I'll send you the link to this so you can put it in the show notes too, about the bees and the disappearance of bees, and where have all the bees gone? It's a stunning poem, and I have that usually right by my desk. I've got one solitary post-it note there at the moment, but normally I have it as a reminder. I have two poems. One's on kindness, and the other is on where are the bees, because I would hate to think that my child is the last generation to see bees and all the magic that they bring to the world. So that for me is it's not a metaphor. It's a statement, a poetical statement about the what if side of things.
For me, it's butterflies. So I used to
Why?
go. I used to go holidaying in Cornwall and Devon when I was a kid, back in early mid-80s. And I just remember butterflies everywhere and all these buddleia with butterflies. And I've
Yes,
taken my children back to those same places 30, 40 years later, and they're just not there anymore. And it's so
yes.
obvious.
Yeah, and isn't that sad? And I think on the
Mm.
very Australian side of things, when I used to do a road trip as a kid, driving into the bush, the front of the car would be a massacre site, just millions of insects. And now you can very tamely go for a long drive, and you're lucky if you hit something
Yeah.
in the air. Again, and that's our biodiversity, and the disappearance of all of these things that keep our planet functioning. Can I flip a question back on you, Tom, if I'm allowed to?
Mhm.
Because you've had the opportunity to interact with many people and to hear people pitching and giving their messages and trying to be as succinct and as charismatic as possible. What's working for you, do you think, in the people who you're talking to and interacting with?
Well, I mean, we had this question, which is actually a question of my partner Nathaniel. It's not my credit, but so on the whole, our work tends to be around working on behalf of communications teams for these international NGOs. These people that are coming on, have been well trained, and so they're coming out, and they're super charismatic and they're very inspirational. But ultimately, you know, the challenge is to get them away from just saying what they've said 100 times
Uh,
before in front of 100 other cameras, and try and loosen them up. And so I try to sort of get towards more the emotional stuff. So we've invented this question, which is like, what brings you joy in your work? And it's really interesting. It's really interesting because suddenly they're tapping into like a really fundamental, essential part of being a human being, the concept of joy. It's quite, in many ways, it's quite a challenging question, and then their true self comes through. And in the vast majority of cases, they relax, their shoulders drop, and they open up, and it's like,
uh,
finally I'm allowed to. It's also like quite a safe question as well, because ultimately it's not about doing anti-governmental messages or what have you. It's just about sort of personal reaction. But what is also interesting is that once in a while they react really badly to the question. And I'm not going to name any names or name any organizations, but there may be the truth behind what they're actually saying and how much they actually believe in it, like, comes through as well. So I feel like it's
yes,
a good way to weed out the greenwashers.
yes, yes. And I've seen you ask that question. On the ground, and the effect it has is tremendous, actually, because you go to a safe space in your head because you know what gives you joy.
Yeah,
And therefore it gives you that energy to take forward and think about, saying things. That's a genius question. And I've loved watching you ask that question to colleagues and acquaintances of mine when you're filming. It's always surprising what comes out, right?
it is. Yeah, and again, it's Nathaniel. It's not me. I'm just the puppet. Um, Okay, so we're almost at the end now, and we're trying to be disciplined for time. Again, I would love to speak for 3 times as long, but uh, what's a key thing you've learned in your career that you can share to our audience of climate communicators, cross sector, different countries? What's this one piece of wisdom that that you've learned in your
Mm.
decades in this?
I think, 20 years ago when we were first as communicators starting to look at behavioral change and behavioral science, there was this established pathway that you had to give people knowledge, so built understanding. Once people had understanding, they could do and finally take action. And I think that's actually flipped on its head. The thing I've learned is get people to take action immediately and
Mm.
then follow up with the why. So you've got to have something that sparks a reaction. Emotion can be a form of action. You've got to have something that sparks a reaction or gives people something to do. You can fill in the blanks later, but if we go along this traditional awareness, knowledge, understanding, action, it's going to take too long. And I don't think it's how we work. Give people something to do. And that's my challenge with any team I work in now. Forget the policy, forget the strategy. What can we give people to do now? Because once they've done something, you take that first step towards being part of that change.
And that beautifully leads into what we always have as our last question in every one of these podcasts, which is that in your work, in your role, what is the next thing on your to-do list? What's the
Um,
next thing you're going to do?
I had a very facetious answer to this, which is nothing to do with my role, but my reality of just having moved to Rome and needing to find a hairdresser.
Okay.
But as you can see, disaster. Um, but no, the next thing I need to do in my role is my role is all about how do we transform systems, food and land systems, so that people can access and eat great quality, nutritious food that doesn't cost the planet its future. And and how do we protect biodiversity as part of that? And of course, the private sector is really interested in this for all the wrong reasons. So my job at the moment is thinking creatively about how do I put such an intriguing, investment-worthy proposition in front of some of these non-usual funders that they're compelled to look at systems transformation around what we eat, how we eat it, and where we farm it at scale and for the right amount of time. That's my challenge.
But specifically, like, so what's the very next step you're going to take? Are you going to like open up a Google Doc and have a brainstorming session, or are you going to like read some stuff and take notes and compare the reports? Like, just an actual sort of technical thing that you're going to do to start that goal.
I have very, very concrete. So I had 10 days a couple of weeks ago on the ground in Colombia, where we have a huge, it's a 500-hectare farm, and we have more than 1,000 researchers there doing incredible things. So one meal I ate, we had rice that is fortified with zinc and iron. We had beans that were fortified with zinc. We had beef that was produced with methane-reducing grasses. For me, it's about, and we need continued investment to continue funding these things. So I have a very practical presentation I'm working on now that sets out an investment case for someone, a very wealthy person, who I can go in front of and say, "How about you give us some of your hard-earned cash, and we'll do something good with it."
What a great ending. That's a great final sentence for this podcast. Here, here. Well, look, Steph, thank you so much for giving us your really valuable time. I really appreciate it. And yeah, the best of luck in this new role.
And thank you. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. It always has been right from the very beginning, Tom and team. I can't think of a better partner, a more, akin quality first, but ability to float and be flexible and nimble, which we always need in the situations we find ourselves in. So I'm here's to this great new idea, and wishing you all the best in this important work that you're doing for so many different organizations and people. Thank you.
Bless you. Thank you.